Hello and welcome to episode 426 of the Crate and Crowbar, a gaming podcast being recorded on the 12th of October 2023. I'm Marsh Davis, a wriggling maggot yearning to be born anew in a dark and terrible form, and I'm joined tonight by the modular death robot from a distant solar system, known as Tom Senior 5000 Ultra Prime.
Correct. And also, hello.
Good to have you, Tom. How is it going in that distant solar system?
To what solar system do you refer to, Marsh?
Is it the Rubicon system?
Yes, it is. I've been playing Armored Core 6 Fires of Rubicon, and it's a game about lovely robots shooting fireworks at each other and then dodging really fast and flying around. And it's very beautiful and exciting and austere and full of despair, all at the same time. Because this is a game from Software, the creators, of course, of Dark Souls, Bloodborne, some of the best games ever. I would say if you enjoy those games, don't go into Armored Core looking for that sort of level of depth. But if you like being a sort of weird robot man where you can change your arms and your torso and your legs and your shoulder cannons and your hand cannons at any point, between checkpoints, so that you can maximize your loadout to rain down fire upon your enemies in some lovely third-person mech combat. It is quite a fine game that I've been greatly enjoying.
I'm so interested to hear about this because Armored Core, for me, was a benighted series of games from the yesteryear of my game reviewing days when, a review disc of Armored Core would land on your desktop and your heart would just fucking plummet out of your body. And I think they are actually responsible for my initial resistance to give any time to From Software's better games like Demon's Souls and Dark Souls, because I hated them so much. They seemed like uniquely charmless games in which you were just this inarticulate block of metal sliding around a big grey space.
Look, I'm going to say that based on your description, not a huge amount has changed. It's the first game I've played for ages that I can think of where I haven't seen a single human face represented or pictured or anywhere at all. Like you are like on Rubicon and it's an abandoned planet and it's being consumed by a very precious resource called coral, which is very mysterious. And then there are loads of mercenary groups that move in trying to capture this stuff. And you are fighting amongst kind of like abandoned cityscapes full of like broken skyscrapers and things like that. But you're some sort of consciousness infused into a robot fighting other consciousnesses infused into robots. And therefore, on a sort of like spiritual level, nothing matters. However, it is a very good premise to sort of let you sort of cause chaos and carnage with your arsenal of massive, increasingly huge weapons as you kind of get more money and unlock new kind of purchase options for your mech without sort of having the problem of humans being involved at all. And the result is kind of an interesting mix of like frustrating boss fights, sometimes hitting a kind of wall with the gear that you have, then having to change up your gear and the way that your mech is constructed in order to tackle new challenges, and then gradually learn to understand that, and then having the fun of unlocking better versions of the particular weapons. I'll give some examples. So as I said, you've got your two hand weapons, your two shoulder weapons. The shoulder weapons initially, like, they are missile launchers and they can lock on, or you can just like spray them out at an individual target if you need to in a panic. And then your two kind of like main weapons, they could be laser rifles. They shoot like one linear blast that can go through shields, and then, or they could be submachine guns. And my favorite build is to have a very light mech that's very, very fast, boots really fast towards enemies, And then once you're there, you've got like an Uzi in each arm, basically. And then you use that to rinse the shield down. And then when the shield is down, blast them with missiles. And what's really fun about the game is that there's lots of different ways to... That's the way I like to do things. But you could also change your legs, swap them out for a huge tank track. So imagine the bottom of like a World War II tank, but with a humanoid torso sprouting out of it. And then because you're much heavier, that means that you can equip much bigger weapons to each arm and your shoulders. So you can just fit bazookas for your arms and then bazookas for your shoulders. And it looks ridiculous. It's really, really stupid. But I've had so much fun just sort of like going into missions with these bizarre, different kind of swap in and swap out mechs and sort of trying to take them on in these ridiculous rigs. And like some of them, they just fail immediately. you go in there, it's like, no, this is wrong. I've built a bad thing. And everything I'm shooting is missing because the enemies in this particular level are very fast. Or if there's like a huge, tanky opponent, sometimes it pays to just like stay far away from them if they've got close range weapons. So you want to rebuild your robot in that way. So a lot of fun of the game, like as a sort of moment-to-moment combat game, there's lots of fun dodging, hovering, managing your ammo, managing like when you're going to shoot and also when you're not going to shoot. It's like jazz. It's the rockets you don't shoot that really matter sometimes in these boss fights because you're trying to burst their shields. So you want to burst their shields with one particular weapon, but then have bigger stuff in the background that you can bring as soon as their shields are down and they're perhaps like stunned. So there's real craft to the kind of moment-to-moment combat, particularly in the excellent one-on-one kind of they're called ACs, these mechs, so it's mech versus mech. And you go into a level and they'll just sort of show up and they might even have like a little cutscene and a line of dialogue. And they may, like, one is like, you know what, rookie, I've just realized Rubicon really needs me. But tell me, who really needs you? And I'll be like, I don't know who you are. I don't know where you've come from. I don't know like what your deal is, but I'm just about to have a really fantastic fireworks battle with you, with just spraying rockets out of my arms and firing plasma. I've got like a build with like a Gatling gun in each arm, and it's just absolutely ridiculous. You sort of run around sort of blazing, just like indiscriminately, just things are just exploding everywhere. Some of the environments are explosive and destructible. And I found it as like a kind of combat playground to be a lot of fun. And I've really enjoyed it on that basis.
Is it? I mean, when you say that going to some levels and then the enemies are too fast for the build you're using, is it? Do you get the sense that each level requires you to switch to a specific build in a sort of like puzzle it out kind of way, or are there like a breadth of solutions to any kind of single problem?
Occasionally, I think that it definitely funnels you to. But I think it challenges you like towards the end of the first act. Pretty much, it explicitly says you're probably going to need to change your build for this. Like you're a mercenary, so your handler says that to you. And you also have a limited number of options at that point, and so you have to be like, if you really enjoy missiles, but something requires a much faster build with smaller weapons, you kind of have it forces you to learn that. But I have found that like as I get on in the game, you sort of there are alternative solutions to a bunch of like most of the typical combat encounters. The exceptions are the bosses, I say. I think like the bosses do require you to really spec hard for a particular build based on observed combat patterns. So there is definitely a degree of trial and error, which is often frustrating in this sort of situation. But the great thing about it is that missions are between 5 and 10 minutes long. And they're mostly well checkpointed, and you can restart from checkpoints. And every time you restart from a checkpoint, you can rebuild your mech based on, and you have access to everything that you've purchased, and you can just completely respec it. and then try again. And
So
so
it's not the sort of mech equivalent of the bonfire system from Dark Souls. Oh, right, okay.
No, it's much more iterative, and it doesn't punish you for changing builds. Like, you'd have to pay for it. It's something that you could just freely, as soon as you bought the weapon, it's in your arsenal, you could just swap into it, and it'll often just throw you directly straight into a boss fight after that. Like, no run back, the classic run back from a bonfire from Dark Souls. Right. No, it's way more streamlined and trimmed than that. Like, it's much more exciting and like immediate, and that's what I found like so exciting about it, because if there was that kind of padding of the run back or having to fight through a few mobs to get to a boss, like the time cost of experimenting with your mech and your build would just be too great. So it's just very well thought out in terms of how its missions are built. And having said that, there's actually like a surprising number of sort of little secrets and things built into the levels, even though they are quite short. And the levels themselves are kind of, as I said, it's a very austere, like kind of initially a grey world, but it is a spectacular place that I wish I want to know more about, because it's an abandoned planet that's essentially been designed to mine this coral substance. But whenever you look up, there's these huge kind of superstructures, like almost hovering cities above you, just all across the view. And as like the coral spreads across the sky, it sort of burns red, and there's this very apocalyptic feeling to a lot of the missions that, they didn't have to do that. They could have made this just more grey sandboxes. And as you sort of like plunge further down into like different cities and things, like sometimes you get to do the Death Star thing, where there's like a huge thing, a skyscraper-sized turbine that is creating a laser barrier, and you sort of have to fly into it with your mech, blast a load of stuff, blast the core, and then suddenly blast out as it's, you've got 2 minutes to escape, but then suddenly you're shut into an arena and everything turns like a molten red around you because the thing is about to blow, and you have to beat this really irritating, natty, fast mech in like 1 minute, because like you have to beat it and then open the doors, then get out, and then blast through the doors as the explosion erupts behind you. And the explosions in this game are incredible. Like, huge stuff blows up all the time, and it always looks fantastic. And then sometimes you might go into one of these levels and go into like a huge facility that's run by a bunch of rebels, and then get shot into a room where you basically have to fight a mobile factory, like on treads. and it's got a great big honking sort of steam engine thing, with a giant spout off its back there that shoots missiles at you, because everything in this game shoots missiles out of every orifice at all times. But that's also its weak point, so you hover above it and firing stuff down into it as it's trying to sort of like grab you with its giant claws, and it's spectacular nonsense. Really, yeah, it's good.
This sounds vastly more epic than my admittedly probably very jaundiced recollection of the earlier Armored Core games. Yeah. Oh, well, do you feel like it has inherited anything from Dark Souls or Bloodborne in terms of the kind of at least the like maybe the narrative or the way it's presenting the spectacle?
There are some sort of, it's hard to really tie them together. Like, obviously, like you're coming late to a dead world, which is very much a very Soulsy thing, and sort of picking up little sort of audio logs here and there, little bits of lore that you can find in the environment that also kind of drop items, which is pretty cool. Enigmatic, as I said, the guy who just announces himself as needed by Rubicon, like that's very Dark Souls. Like the first time you play that game, like the first time, like I remember encountering Sif, the giant wolf in Dark Souls. I was like, I didn't know what on earth was going on. I would just like wandered down into this place, and like I don't know the relevance is it's an amazing character with a fantastic backstory, and it's quite possible that the mechs have similar backstories. I don't think they do, to be honest, but they might be tied into like deeper Armored Core lore. But I would compare it favorably, I think most closely to the brilliant boss fight with, I think she's called called Maria in the Bloodborne expansion. The boss you fight at the top of the clock tower, and so like the great thing about both of those about that fight, and also all of the fights in Armored Core, is that your enemies have weapons that you can acquire and use as well. So your movesets are comparable in some way, and then it's just down to outfoxing or just being faster and more reactive than your opponent. And I think it's Maria. That boss fight at the top of the clock tower is very much about that. It's very much like equals fighting instead of the classic, boss fight thing of them being huge and you having to take them down, hit their weak points. No, it's actually like a sort of one-on-one fight with someone with similar abilities, and obviously like halfway through the fight they gain extra abilities and their attacks get extra qualities. That happens in Armored Core, Dark Souls, and Bloodborne. That also happens across the entire series. But that feeling of battling, that one-on-one battle is present.
That's always the sign of the best Dark, Soulsborne bosses are when they're the same scale as you. This guy's gonna fuck me up.
Yeah, it's like, so you've got bosses in Dark Souls like Ceaseless Discharge, which is obviously the best name for a boss ever, who's just like a colossal, big, giant blob who squirts, acid everywhere. And that's kind of fun, but it's nothing like you're fighting, the fallen knights in that game. Those for me the fights that really I feel really tense about, because it feels like a real sword fight or a battle, even though obviously the moves are really exaggerated and everything. Actually gaining victory in those moments. Armored Core does a really good job of, when you actually vanquish one of these enemies, like there's a little slow motion moment where you get to see exactly how you defeated them, like exactly the shot or the missile that got through, or the slash. You get this close combat weapons as well that actually did for them. And that's very, very rewarding, because it also reinforces the fact that the projectiles you're firing are physically interacting with the enemy that you're fighting. Like in the physics system, because you can't go into slow motion and then have show a massive miss that and they somehow detonate.
Does that work for the close combat weapons as well? That it's physically modeled?
Yes. The thing I'd say about the close combat weapons is that they're kind of they all tend to be based around like a massive lunge or a sequence of lunges, and the main problem with them is targeting, because you can start lunging and sometimes it's very fast paced, and you could be above someone and the mech can jet under you, and then you could just slash into nowhere, and that feels really imprecise and weird, because there is a lock on in the game, and that's super important for missiles, and it's really important for all the weapons. So it can be that's probably the weakest aspect of the combat, but it's also important because it doesn't use ammo. You can slash whenever the ability is recharged, and that's there's a lot of it's a great benefit to having that in your arsenal when you've run out of missiles, and you've run out of ammo on your Gatling gun. You can always slash, and I've had hilarious fights where when you run out of ammo on an arm, you press the button and the default is just to punch. And I've not defeated someone with a punch yet, but there should be an achievement or some sort of pop-up celebration of the fact that you've managed. It does no damage, but I've accidentally punched someone and then slashed them with the other arm and got them. But yeah, the targeting in close combat is that's probably the weakest part of it.
How do you balance? I mean, how do you manage ammunition in the game? Are there ammo pickups around the environment, or is it just something that recharges at certain points?
So the ammo tends to be preloaded into your weapon as you start a mission. In some missions, maybe quarter of the ones I've done so far, you'll get towards the end of the mission, maybe 2/3 of the way through or just before a boss fight, and there will be a resupply point that will give you back ammunition, and crucially, healing vials, or whatever they're called in this game, of which you always have 3, which is really interesting. So it's not an Estus Flask situation. It's a resource you really have to carefully manage. For the most part, it's like it wants you to build your mech well and go into the thing well prepared for the challenge that you're going to face. But then once you hit those resupply points, or just before a big boss, often you're going to kind of sometimes have to die and then rebuild your mech to face that particular boss. And I would be way more annoyed about that if it wasn't for the checkpointing. Because if it wasn't for the fact that actually a boss fight lasts about 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and then you're back to the drawing board. You go back into your little menu and you equip all of your new weapons, your new loadout, and then you go back in and you sort of test it. And yeah, that for me is a reasonable amount of time to spend to kind of invent a new mech and then charge it at a boss enemy.
I'm intrigued by this. I'm intrigued. I don't know that it's going to be for me. I have, among my many weird things, Tom, is that I kind of find mechs to be strangely boring. It always feels like, hey, we could build a massive robot, and you've chosen to build it in the same shape as a person. Just feels like a really strange choice. It's like, building a massive robot in the shape of a cow. You're like, why? Why have you done that? But it does intrigue and please me to know that From Software hasn't been their entire development structure hasn't been completely consumed with the production of Soulsborne-ian games. Those design paradigms aren't just going to be shoved into every single thing that they do, that they have still a lot of expertise that can be turned to other types of experience. And that's really cool, I think.
Yeah, I would say that you definitely do need a degree of mech enthusiasm to enjoy this one. I think if you're going to go in, I agree. It's very, very silly. I've enjoyed sort of mech games from when when I started playing PC games, like the old Mech Warrior games, which are very, very different. They're more sim games than anything else. I thought the idea of being in a cockpit of a mech seemed like the coolest thing ever, and never questioned the fact that why would you build it like this? But if you're looking for that sort of sim experience, this is not it. This is you're a humanoid thing, even if you've got tank tracks for an arse. You're basically a humanoid jetting around the place, firing off rockets in quick succession, managing resources. That is what the game is, and don't expect much plot beyond that. Though amazingly, there is a branching story. You get choices between missions, and there are multiple endings with different bosses and things. And I imagine if I had the patience to actually go in and read the lore and stuff, that might be quite interesting. But yeah, I like you. I'm also very happy that they've just made an action game, which they're really, really good at. I think sometimes coverage of the Souls games focuses on the narrative and the lore and the great world building and the incredible atmosphere of those games, and perhaps a little bit less on how good combat is in those games, or the way it works, even when it seems like how annoying it is in Dark Souls, the original Dark Souls, when an enemy's sword goes through a wall occasionally. There's always been jank and awkward points in their combat, but it's always been compelling. From that game onwards, especially Bloodborne. There are always cheeses and stuff like Father Gascoigne and other missions. There are points in Dark Souls where you can shoot through walls and stuff. There's always that stuff in those games, but there's something fundamentally really fascinating and consuming about being engaged in combat in those games, really facing off against an enemy that is serious most of the time. And that's something that Armored Core has as well. There are definitely some little sort of pleb robots that you get sort of mince up between the real fights, and there are little sort of gremlins and goblins and little slugs and stuff in Dark Souls like that as well. but they do build up to, like, they do make one-on-one fights feel fantastic, and that's an art.
I won't play it.
I don't think you'd like it, Marsh. I'll be honest.
I won't play it simply because there's just a fucking ridiculous number of games that I do want to play at the moment. I'm struggling to get through them. I'm struggling to commit to the time to the ones I've already started.
Oh yeah. And so what's the main, like, what's the one that you're really buying into at the moment?
Well, what I will talk about is the game I've just finished, which is Cocoon, which didn't take me a terribly long time to finish. So I'm quite pleased. I've been able to tick that off, and I can get back to other stuff now. But Cocoon is great. Just before I talk about Cocoon, I've also been playing the beta test, the latest beta test for Tom Francis's game, Tactical Breach Wizards.
Cool.
And if that were to be released this year, it would be my game of the year, as it would have been last year and all the years in which I've played beta tests for it. But it just seems to be getting better and better. And I don't know when he'll stop. I don't know if he can be stopped.
I can't. It's one of those that I'm sort of I'm waiting for it. As soon as it's ready to go, then I'll be like, yes, let's do some tactical breaching. And
I'm in two minds about that. The beta I played so far feels there's the part of the game which you can play feels in itself very complete, even though there are parts to come. But maybe it is worth waiting for the real thing. I don't know. I fucking love it, man. Anyway, enough. Yes, Cocoon. You've also played a bit of this, right?
Yeah, I played the first hour, and I'm desperate to get back to it.
I think it's tremendous. It may not quite be my game of the year, but it's definitely up there amongst the ones that have really charmed me so far. It's we talked about it on the podcast before because it's appeared at lots of different games industry showings, and we haven't been able to interpret from those showings what it was at all. Yeah. You appear to be a beetle, and you have a big glowing ball on your back. But beyond that, I don't know, who knows? It turns out it's a tremendous puzzle game, and it's from the design, at least some of the designers of Limbo, and I do like it as a puzzle game. I think it has a sophisticated and suitably kind of mind warping premise in itself, which is also extremely well explored. And but I'll get to that premise in a bit. Moreover, what I've enjoyed about it is the aesthetic experience, which I suppose you might expect from the people who brought you Limbo. And that experience will maybe only meaningfully be summed up to a very small percentage of our audience as, what if Fez but Vangers?
Yeah, I thought about Fez a lot during that. It's beautiful.
It has that same. It's not a platformer. It is. It has a not exactly top-down view, but you're viewing affairs from more or less above. But it has that same sort of winsomely exploratory and tactile experience that Fez projects. The idea that you are in a world with its own kind of rules and logic that you're looking around, and it is also mediated by, this is the Vangers part, and not that many people may have played the seminally weird game Vangers back in 1998 or wherever it was, but it has this completely alien but internally very coherent setting. In Vangers and in Cocoon, that alienness is expressed through a landscape and an architecture and like an implied culture that is born of creatures who have a completely different physiology to us. Yeah. So it's a broadly insectoid physiology. So there are kind of parts of that kind of language of the game world which you are familiar in an insectoid way, but it's everything, all the verbs of the game, all the kinds of things you interact with are completely co-opted by that. So everything you interact with is like some gloopy orifice or sphincter or like wriggling mass or chitinous limb or iridescent shell and so on and so forth. But what's weird about that is and what I think is rather clever about the way the game has approached that is it doesn't try to make that feel icky specifically. I think it recognizes that you, the player, are part of that world too, and in fact, that is something that isn't alarming to you as a player, and so it expresses through the language of like insectoid forms, beauty and a sort of coherency to the things that you're doing that I think is surprising.
It makes me think of just in beginning of the game, some basic switches you interact with are sort of fleshy balls on tendons that you pull along a rail until they reach the end of the rail. And that sounds disgusting when I describe it in that way, but the way it feels is deeply satisfying because of just this the rumble in the pad if you're playing with the pad, and the sort of sense of tension and the way it clicks into place as something changes in the world around you. Which the sound in this game is incredible. So
amazing score as well, beautiful score.
That's another thing that reminded me of Fez. Actually, I think that sort of I think that's also the score in particular creates that sense of comfort as well, in that this could be, as you say, like a really slightly disgusting place, but it feels elegant and somehow like it's a kind of mixture of beautifully crafted platforms that rotate as you float from bit to bit, but then there'll be lots of sort of fleshy constructs surrounded by like tree branches and things looking at you and pulsing in strange ways. It's something like it's an amazing feat for something to feel alien but so fine at the same time. I think that's a really good way to put it.
Well, it's very organic, but there's also like an incredible elegance to it. And I think some of that stuff comes from like a lot of the, as we will explain, the game deals with different concepts of scale, and I think one of the kind of sort of touchstones for the way it looks is like life at microbial level, or aquatic life at a microbial level, and you get these shapes and patterns of things that feel like they are the kinds of things you would observe under a microscope, but as well as being sort of immediately kind of alarming at some level because of their unfamiliarity, there's also sort of a symmetry to them that you do observe, like in the fractal spiral of a snail shell, that kind of organic construct, which is also very ordered. And it's interesting the way it plays with, the sloppy, gloopy end of nature and the sort of fractal. How is this born of nature? End of nature. But yes, maybe to address the fundamental puzzle concept, you are a little beetle person. It's not clear what you're doing initially in these sprawling, gooey puzzle spaces. But you are sort of essentially just doing the things you can and must do in order to progress, and your larger purpose doesn't exactly reveal itself. But there is an escalation to your actions that you can read stuff into, although that is an intentionally opaque alien set of interactions to some degree. But anyway, the puzzle concept is the fact that you can pick up these big glowing orbs and you can carry them around with you on your back. And each of these, the several glowing orbs that you encounter across the course of the game, commutes to you a particular power over the environment. So you pick up, I think the orange orb is the first one you get, which allows you to sort of materialize otherwise invisible bridges between particular nodes, and you can't walk on them unless you have the orange orb on your back. Then you get a green orb, and that lets you change the environment, and it lets you make these columns of fog alternately solid and permeable, and so that if you stand in the fog and then make it solid, you'll be punted up to the top of the column, and then it's a lift basically. And you get both of these fairly early on, and they sound quite prosaic, actually. Although they're presented, like the visual metaphor with which they affect the world is beautiful and stunning and weird. Actually, when you think about what they do, it isn't kind of that mind blowing. But then later on, and I won't spoil the mechanics of the later orbs which you obtain, they are immediately more complicated in their potential purposes. But essentially, at the most basic level, the puzzles are ones about sequencing. So I use the green orb to get through this obstacle so I can unlock a shortcut back to where I left the orange orb so I can then open up the next bit of path beyond that, which is not like terribly subtle puzzle stuff. But where it goes then is to allow you to go inside the world of the orbs.
Oh, yeah.
So each orb is not just a power-up in itself, but it also contains an entire puzzle world within it, which also needs you to have orbs on your back in order to solve them. So you carry your one orb inside another orb, and you end up threading this path through multiple levels of reality, taking orbs inside one another to solve the puzzles there before finding some other meta layer where you can switch which orb is on your back. And then later, puzzles allow you to nest orbs in like every possible layer of reality, and then essentially short circuit that hierarchy in order to take an orb inside itself. And that's the point at which my brain started seeping out of my ears, and I absolutely loved it.
I'm just at the point where you start putting orbs inside orbs to carry orbs to other orbs, and it's very, very good. And also the sort of when you transport. So there are sort of like pedestals where you put an orb so you can transport into it. The effect for going in and out of those orbs is so good every single time. Like it's amazing the way you sort of plunge in. It sort of feels like your whole consciousness being sucked into this thing, blasted out of it. Like whenever you're doing, as you say, like if you're going to kind of like put the puzzles down on paper, they might sound simple as a pure guide solution. But the actual experience of going through that is, like, so far has been so deeply satisfying aesthetically.
Yeah, the fundamental idea of it has been, I've seen it elsewhere before. Like there was a game called Patrick's Parabox where you sort of like, it was a soccer band puzzle, but the blocks you were pushing were miniature single screen puzzles of the same kind that you were currently in, and you could go inside those blocks and then sometimes push other blocks outside of those blocks. But I mean, that was that's a great game in itself, but this is a much more kind of constrained, and I mean, for one thing, the landscapes you are going into aren't single screen puzzles, but these sprawling environments that you explore different parts of over time, and you're juggling only a handful of orbs, whereas Patrick's Parabox is more like a very, very long sequence of individual puzzles, whereas this is reusing the same orbs and the same environments to do different things within them. And what I like admire about its puzzle design is the fact that the game is so careful and subtle about making sure that you have everything you need.
Right. And
like there are parts of this game where some weird sphincter creature will take your orbs away. Like I got powerful like orb separation anxiety from that, because I was like, oh no, I've lost track of where my orbs are. I don't know. But you need to just trust that the game will give them back to you when you need them, and it never screws you over. You never end up screwing yourself over, because the game is so careful about making sure to gate progress in ways which invisibly force you to fully prepare for the challenge ahead, and making sure, like when you go through a gate, it makes sure that you have to activate that gate by placing all the orbs you have in the correct slots, so that you can't end up, you never leave an orb behind somewhere. And it has some of just the smoothest tutorialization I've ever seen in a puzzle game. So it's always making sure you understand the full range of your powers, and it somehow does that without ever boring or patronizing you. At least that's how I felt about it. Maybe other people who are smarter than me will find it trivial, but yeah.
I had exactly the same experience, because I don't think I've encountered a single spoken word or pop-up bit of text as far as I can remember.
Yeah, none.
It's just, you've got the tools you have and you can wander around, and then through the way sort of the tutorial works is that it just limits your options to such an extent that there's only one thing that you could possibly do, and then you realize, I can this is very, very early stuff, but I can drop an orb into a pipe and it will go fall down into a different area, and that might help. And also there's only like one button apart from like moving around, I think you just on so far. I think I just pressed A on everything in order to pick things up, swap them between pedestals, wander around, drop things. I think I've just pressed one button to interact, and that's been it. And that's kind of remarkable, given that it's sort of going to build into quite a complex puzzle game. Sometimes you have to hold A to kind of plunge into orbs and things like that. But I think it very carefully limits choice in order to teach you things without ever having to say a word, which is remarkable.
Yeah, that is exactly what it's doing. It's paring away all the potential confusing and distracting choices you might have, so that you fully understand what's happening to you at all times. I will say there are boss fights in the game.
Yes,
which I totally hated. Like, I'm not sure. I don't think they were bad in themselves. I just absolutely wasn't up for it.
they're kind of weird. It's a weird shift to bullet hell for those boss fights. That it doesn't feel like suddenly you have to be sort of do some dodgy reactive stuff, whereas previously it's all been very much just not plodding, but like running around quite casually, sort of experimenting with things, and then being pushed into these like 3-stage boss fights again. Where they increasingly limit your movement, and you have to dodge between projectiles and then hammer them at particular points. Feels like it's from a different game a little bit. I do understand that.
Yeah, I think I think they're probably fine in themselves, and I probably happily play a game of that. It's just that gear shift I found to be like really wrenching. And there are later, they're not boss fights, but they are sort of tied to the boss fights, which are pure reaction time things where you have to exactly judge the time it will take for a projectile to cross a very large distance. And that I found to be quite annoying. I mean, I am at the point in my life where my cognitive decline is more or less a straight line down. So my reaction times aren't up to snuff really. But I did, even then I did get through these challenges pretty much always just after a couple or maybe 3 goes, but I totally resented every second of them. But I do understand why they're there. I do think the game probably benefits from like the drama that they bring, and also some sort of mechanical variance and shift in pace.
Some kind of peril.
Yeah.
Really.
Yes, but maybe that is enough to take the shine off it being Game of the Year for me. But otherwise, I absolutely loved it. Very, very good indeed.
It's gorgeous. That's going to be my Sunday this weekend.
Yay!
Ooh. No, you said Game of the Year quite a few times, and but I can't ask you yet because it feels like we should have a group pod to sort of go over them later on.
Do you have any kind of feelings about where you might go with that?
Look, weirdly, I'm going to pitch for Midnight Suns.
Oh, really?
Loved it. I still haven't completed it. I know I'm going to have to actually think about that properly though. Like after all the releases and everything I've played. That game there's something good about that game in particular that I've really enjoyed this year.
I'm going to have to go back to. I'll have to put that on my list for among the many things that I have to go back to.
I mean, I warn you, it's so long. It's so long. It's way too long. But as a kind of like really playful way to interact with the Marvel universe, and some really kind of fun combat and great kind of character development in terms of mechanical character development as in a turn-based format, I like it a lot.
You're not saying you wouldn't put Baldur's Gate up there as a contender?
I've not played enough of it yet, so I was again like trying to save it. I was going to save it for Christmas, like the Christmas break, so I could probably like delve into it. But I couldn't resist. I played the first sort of hour or so, and I found it to be quite chaotic so far. Particularly like when it comes to combat and stuff. I'm like, don't feel like I have a good handle on what my group of cool D&D characters can do properly, like, and how to use them properly. And there's stuff like, I think I need to get used to the pace of just failing checks and then having to sort of like tumble through conversations into disastrous consequences. And I think that's just sort of like how that game is going to work for me. But it like I'm sort of like holding fire on having a full fully formed thought on that, really.
Yeah, I feel similarly. I haven't played quite enough of it to. I mean, I've really enjoyed the narrative elements of it. I haven't really gelled with the mechanical aspects of it, but I have reached a point where that stuff is opening up to me in a much larger way now. So maybe things will change dramatically from this point on. But I haven't had time to go back to it, and I've also forgotten everything that's happened.
Oh yeah, that's always the problem.
But Shadow Gambit, that's also on my list. I absolutely love that.
Oh yeah,
I need to play Lamplighters League as well. Talking of turn-based things, because that seems like that's
that looks
meant to be good.
That looks lovely. Apparently, not so great for insta-fail stealth sections.
Oh, really? Oh,
yeah, we'll see. Crate and Crowbar crime has been committed. Call the police. Call Tom Francis.
He defenestrates, bursts through a window. I mean, Cyberpunk 2077's DLC could be a contender as well. Unfortunately, I've got to a point where it won't patch and it won't play, and it also won't ever patch. It just patches to the top.
Oh God!
Starts again. So I don't know what to do about that. Really,
that just sucks. It can't be happening.
But what I played of that, I really enjoyed. Not noticeably less janky, as far as I can tell, than the original Cyberpunk 2077 release, but good story. I love Idris Elba. He's a nice man.
Idris Elba's great. So I did it. I reviewed it for Eurogamer, and I don't think we put stars on it. So it was just impressions, I suppose. And I really enjoyed it and found the time to be well worth it. I do agree. There's definitely loads of sort of built-in Cyberpunk jank that will never be fixed. And a lot of that stuff is like just pathing, just civilians interacting with traffic or traffic interacting with traffic. Involved and not like in a sort of, deliberate, like realistic car crashes. It's more like I restarted the game and my friend Jackie hopped onto his motorcycle and he tried to, leave the scene after, quite an intense, conversation. And then he bumped 3 times into the back of a police van. And then he slightly turned right, and then he bumped into the back of some sort of tiny truck thing that happened to be parked there. And he bumped into that a few times. And then he turned left. And then I just looked away and fast traveled somewhere else. Because I was like, this is never going to resolve itself. Like, if there was any more dialogue to happen in that scene, it wasn't going to happen. that guy's done. He's gone. He's got his own things to deal with.
I started from a late game save that I had previously, so I had to respec my character. So I went to the I can't remember the Ripper Doc. Ripper Doc. And when the entire time I was in that menu, the voice line "beep beep motherfucker" was playing over and over again. And I eventually emerged from the Ripper Doc to find that my car was wedged 2/3 up through the wall of the building I was in. No idea why. They've
put in a huge 2.0 update that's kind of revamped the entire skill system for the better, and adding new extra skills and new sort of spec your character. All that stuff's great. From a RPG design level, I pretty admire it.
Have they completely removed all enemy levels? It feels like they have. I don't know whether that's just me not noticing where it says what level enemies are now, but it feels like you.
I think they're regional. I think they're more in Bethesda games where you walk into an area and they tend to sort of be roughly your level. I think they've definitely adjusted that. I can't say precisely how, actually, to be honest. So it's good because you should be that game is set in one city, and if you can't have no-go zones in a city that block off too much of it, because it feels stupid if the idea is that you're able to sort of hop on a motorbike or get in a car and go anywhere you want to and sort of look at the city without being one-shotted by a random rubbish gangster. It just I think the city scale thing changes it more so than for Assassin's Creed, for example, where there are regions that it flags that these are high-level regions and you can't go here yet. I still find that annoying, to be honest. But I feel as though level gating is just in MMOs, it works for good reasons, but if it's just like an open world city game, level gating is terrible. I really hate it.
I'm amazed that they haven't reassessed how stealth works, or if they have, they haven't presented it any differently, because you still have this mini map where enemies have vision cones, and yet they can spot you when you aren't anywhere near their vision cone, and they go brink as the classic Metal Gear noise, and yet sometimes the brink means that they've spotted you, and sometimes they just carry on walking. It's like, what do any of the things that you've put in your UI or your or your game mean? Like,
yeah, there's a super awkward interaction between being in a sort of first-person stealth game and dice rolls, and having an RPG system fundamentally sort of like behind these things. So like lots of the augments you get and the sort of advances you get at the River Dog might give you extra moments of chance to reduce the percentage of being detected, which is all very well. But as you say, it does actually fundamentally make the act of stealthing around completely unpredictable because, we've talked about like probability before on the podcast and how, if you happen to fall at the wrong end of the bell curve, you get screwed every time, or you are successful all the time. And it's still a frustrating hangover from the kind of like core idea behind the game. The thing is, like, for example, The Witcher 3 is like the combat is based on loads of RPG dice rolls in terms of critical hits and even misses occasionally. I think they might change that. But The Witcher 3 was never a stealth game and never pretended to be an immersive sim in a sort of Deus Ex, zone. So it feels as though, like, if you're going to create that experience for people, you have to make stealth completely certain. Like, if you're hidden behind a thing, or you intrude into an enemy's vision cone when you've got an upgrade that says that you should get 5 seconds grace before they actually see you, you've got to honor that. It shouldn't be like maybe like, I know that's my experience of the system. Maybe it isn't just dice rolls, but that's how it feels. It does feel like it's not. I wonder if it scan detection, distance detection, rather than dice rolls, but it just going based on the descriptions of the upgrades you can get. That seems to be how it works.
Yeah, I think maybe this would feel more readable to me if I'd had the experience again of unlocking those upgrades over time and really deliberating about what they meant. But because I was a blank slate again, and I didn't want to spend like an hour poring over every single part of that upgrade menu, I just quite quickly made the decisions about what things I wanted without necessarily reading deeply into what the effects were. So maybe all that stuff would be more readable to me if I'd given it the appropriate consideration that you would expect across 40 hours of play, instead of just jumping back in and doing it all again in 15 minutes while a robot shouts beep beep motherfucker at me.
I don't know, like, I think you have to expect the player to make a snap decision, because there are probably almost certainly more exciting things in the game to be getting on with. So, like, let's play the new Assassin's Creed, and I'm enjoying it.
Is that good?
I'm enjoying it. It's kind of really, really like trimmed the RPG numbers game stuff, and it's all the better for it in that respect. So the enemy vision cones are mostly clear, and it's more of a sort of like tactical stealth game moment to moment. But there's still some inherent Assassin's Creed jank to it. Like I don't know, there's some odd enemy behavior. For example, if I've assassinated 2 people in a room, another guy wanders in, and he'll, like, sometimes they just won't notice, and they'll just sort of like turn around and go back on their path. Sometimes they will notice, and they'll slowly walk across, and then obviously it's an invitation to assassinate them. So you could create these sort of like weird choke point traps where you just leave the bodies there, and then like a guard will come towards them and perhaps or perhaps not care about what he sees in front of him. So there's like, it's, if you're gonna play a game like that, you play Hitman, which is like those systems for like hiding, messing with NPCs it's way more reactive and way more fun. The levels themselves are so like designed, like the lovely sandboxes, designed for you to let you mess with them. Whereas Assassin's Creed is still an open world game that is for like trying to reconcile the idea that you can have certain bits of the open world that are a bit like a Hitman level, but the rules sometimes bleed into the open world, and sometimes the open world rules bleed into the those sectors, and things don't quite sync up or work enough for it to be like a really recommendable game along sort of like stealth assassin lines. I do really like the fact it's moved away from the fact your sword does 10 more damage, means that you can take on different areas. I never thought that was a good fit for Assassin's Creed, and I think that's a really good refresh for that series. I think it's just, it never made sense for the fantasy, even though like Origins was beautiful. Like those games were beautiful, those RPG games, and I really enjoyed exploring them. I took the greatest pleasure out of sort of dipping into the amazing sort of like photography they had, like real life photography of actual artifacts discovered in the area with a bit of history attached in the codex. And I always like enjoyed those as kind of launch pads. And I'll Google that and sort of look into that and read about that. I've always enjoyed that side of Assassin's Creed, and those games were really good at that. And they actually had like entire modes devoted to the fact you could sort of be a tourist and could go around Egypt and actually examine monuments, these beautifully kind of created 3D monuments, and then kind of actually learn a bit of history. I really enjoyed that about those games. But they weren't good Assassin's Creed. Like the fancy of Assassin's Creed is that you're an assassin, and I think they like the way they were structured. Kind of like didn't work for me.
No, I mean you're just a maniac going around walloping absolutely everybody in those games across an entire continent. It felt
100 times just for one guy as well. Like because you'd have a sword that was a bit suboptimal or something, and then like everyone was a hit sponge, so you'd have to hit them like loads of times, then hit another guy loads of times, and it just became sort of farcical, really. I'm glad that I think the new game, the new Assassin's is good. I look forward to the next few. Hopefully they sort of like sharpen those systems up and sort of keep it as a sort of tight sort of 20-hour Assassin's Creed game with a stripped down story. And so far there's not been any total sci-fi bollocks in this one as well.
Really?
Which is
wow.
Yeah, you just get to be Basim in Baghdad, and you get to go to the Grand Bazaar and visit these incredible monuments, and then read cool entries about what these places were used for and how they how they worked at the time. Really cool.
That does sound awesome. It's not on Steam, annoyingly, so it doesn't exist to me. But I'll find some way of obtaining it, I hope. Yeah, I thought though I'd heard somewhere that the pitch for this game was that it was a sort of a smaller scale, whilst they developed a larger entry in the series. So I'd be interested to see if by being larger, they also retain some more of the kind of sludgy RPG, time-wasty stuff that has gradually colonized the series.
My completely random guess, based on sort of diary entries and sort of notes that you find in this game, which refer directly to other assassins from other games, is that they might do a GTA 5 style character switchy thing.
Oh.
Just a guess. But just a guess.
Interesting.
And if I'm wrong, no one will remember that I said that.
Kane will remember.
Oh, he will. That's true. Hold me to account, Kane.
Our sins are never washed away completely.
That's what I would do with it.
I think that's about time for the end of the podcast. If you'd like to send us a question, you can do so at questions@crateandcrowbar.com. You can watch all these recordings as videos on YouTube, where you can find other stuff by us. The address for that is youtube.com/crateandcrowbar. And thanks, as always, to our backers on Patreon. You can back us too at patreon.com/crateandcrowbar, or you could join our Discord community who are a very nice bunch, the link for which is on our website, crateandcrowbar.com. That's it. I've been Marsh Davis. I will shortly become a beautiful, beautiful butterfly.
I've been Tom Senior, and I'm slowly morphing into an obsidian square, like disturbing robot thing. Missiles for hands.
Well, enjoy that and your place on volumetric fog planet Z12. Bye-bye.
Bye.